This video is about several different aspects of image editing. I'm not going to go into detail about editing this particular image because I cover camera raw processing in another video. Okay. We are looking at this image in the camera raw processor, which is often referred to as ACR, because it's a raw file. Right? I typically shoot raw files. Okay, this portrait of this guy was made a few years ago, and obviously on the street. It's in Brooklyn, and I encourage you to shoot multiple pictures of anything. So I had shot 3 of this person, and why shoot 3? The background is changing. People are walking in and out of the frame. There's collisions between people, like my subject here, and sometimes things in the background. For instance, there was a guy standing here to the left. He was right on the guy's shoulder, but a few seconds later, he's out of the frame. But then a few seconds later, this guy pops up. I also adjusted the composition to him, kind of reframing the picture. This could have been an interesting person coming out of the subway. Might have been a nice dynamic between these 2 figures, but I don't really think so. So here's what I'm going to cover. I'm going to get to cropping. So this image needs to be cropped, right? I'm going to talk about whether it should be color or black and white. Right? I'm going to talk about whether to add vignette or not. And lastly, adding borders. Okay, so cropping. I do think this image needs to be cropped. Right? One standard crop, especially for portraits, is the square. Right? So I'm going to go up to the crop tool here in Bridge. It's in the top toolbar here. Crops, and whenever you see that little white downward pointing triangle there, it means you can click on it and you have multiple settings in here. The top one is square, 1:1. All the others are rectangular. Down below that is custom. Custom means I can set the dimensions that I want, and I can also set the resolution that I want. Like, do I want it for print resolution, for screen resolution, that kind of thing. Okay, I'm going to go to 1:1. Okay. When I have the crop tool here, I can draw a box. Draw my box. Right? I can move the box around. What do I want the composition to look like? Right? I think I want this guy to be centered. Fortunately, his head's not right in the middle of the picture. Right? I can grab a corner and say, hey, shrink that down, give me less negative space around the figure. I think I'm going to leave this information here, the context of the guy. Okay? I'm going to press return to complete that crop. There it is. It's that easy. I'm sure you've done it yourself, one application or another. Okay? Why go to rectangular? Sometimes it's to crop out something that's extraneous. It interferes with looking at the focal point of your picture. In this case, square crops or square formats are very stable. Not just in this case, they are. A square format is kind of static. Your eyes don't wander left and right like they do in a rectangular format, or up and down in a vertical rectangular format. It's just square. So you're kind of paused visually. Your attention is paused right on the subject. Right? It can be a really nice effect. Right? This guy's stationary. Your focus on the image is stationary. Right? That's a reason to use a crop. One reason to use a crop. Okay. All right. What else can we do to this picture? Well, we can decide, should it be black and white or should it be color? Do the colors conflict with one another? Do the colors express the mood that you want? Do the colors distract from the subject matter? Like, is the signage back here a problem? It's really not, because all that signage, I'd say, is too small to be distracting. It's also in the shade, and this guy's nicely lit up. Right? So maybe I don't need to worry about color. But another reason to use color is it has, I don't know, it simplifies a picture. It makes it more minimal. It also can make it feel more vintagey, like harken back to the 60s, like street photography of the 60s. Okay, so how do you make an image black and white? Okay, follow me over here on the right, and up in treatment, you've got color, and you've got black and white. Right? That's one easy way to get there. But just to point out to you, you have these profiles, right? And you have a little palette here of profiles. And if you click on that, oh, you have black and white in there. And by the way, you have different presets for different types of edits. more saturation, more contrast, less saturation, and so on. Frankly, I'm not into that because they're intended to simplify the whole process and speed up your workflow. So, if you're in a tight spot and you need to get something pumped out, cool. I personally shoot in RAW because I want complete control over my images, and I know what I want to do with that. I don't really care for presets. By the way, you have a whole menu of these different types of things down here, right? From different color saturations and contrast, to going black and white, and explore them, use them. I don't mean to discourage you. I'm just telling you I don't use them. So there. Okay, I'm going to close that panel. Now I'm back to the original, and I'm going to click on black and white, which obviously makes my image black and white. So don't think, though, that color still doesn't play a part in your picture, right? The color information is still there, and you can affect the look of your black and white picture by changing the presence or lack of different colors. So if I go to the hue, saturation, luminance panel, it's the fourth icon from the left over here on the right, go like that. Oh, here are all the colors that you would see if you're working with a color image, right? Now, there's not a lot of color in this picture aside from basically the guy's skin, some elements in the background. There wasn't much blue in the sky, so I can't really darken that, right? I know that the guy's yellowish skin, it's yellow-orange. If I take the orange slider and I go and reduce that, right, it gets darker. If I go in the other direction and lighten it, it gets lighter, right? And it's really just affecting the parts of the picture that have that orange in there, right? Okay. I know that there's some yellow. I might even think, well, the skin has some yellow in it. If I take this down, what happened? The skin, it's not changing a whole lot, but the background's changing. There's some signs back there that have yellow. The sidewalk, oddly enough, I think it's because of the time of day, it has a yellow tinge to it. And it turns out if I take that slider down, the background gets darker and the guy kind of pops out. He almost looks composited into the picture. I don't really like that look. I might like a subtle hint of it, right? Darken it down a little bit, but I don't really like him to feel like he's composited in the picture. So I take a little bit of yellow out, okay? So, and if this picture had more colors in it, I could choose to do any one of these sliders and see what's going on. Okay. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is add some vignette. Okay, there are a couple of ways to do that. I could go to this lens correction, right, and I can go into, I'm in the manual setting for lens correction, and down at the bottom there's vignette, and I could add vignette like this, but I've cropped the picture. This vignetting is only going to affect the edge of the original frame. It doesn't affect the whole crop, right? That's one problem with it. So I'm not going to use that, right? I will, on the other hand, go to this button that's called Effects, FX. Right? Click on that, right? In here, I could add grain, right? And some people like to do that. It might be the appropriate thing for a given picture. I'm not going to add it here, just only to show you that if I ram it over to the right, I get grain in the picture, right, which can have an urban, gritty, retro kind of feel to it. I'm not going to do that. Down below that is post-crop vignetting. So now I've cropped the image, and if I want to make the edges dark, the vignette follows the cropped image, not the original full frame, right? And you've seen this. I'm sure you use vignetting here and there in various Instagram, Facebook, whatever social media platforms with their filters, right? And some people go with it like really dramatic. I don't do that. I never go this direction either. Make things light. I'm not about that. I find that light edges I find them distracting more than anything else. I do often add a touch of vignette, a dark vignette, to make the edges of the picture just get a little bit darker. And I do that as a framing device so that the viewer's eye doesn't wander to the edge of the picture and then maybe wander off and out of the picture. Right? So I'm going to make it dramatic so that you can see it, but just so you can see these other effects down here. Here's midpoint. It controls how far into the picture the vignette goes. Right? Roundness, I can affect, do I want it to be circular or do I want it to be square in this case, or more rectangular? Right? If I was shooting, if I didn't crop it. And then how much do I want it to be feathered? Right? How soft? Do I want it to be hard? Who wants that? I don't think many people do. And how feathered do I want it to be? Right? Okay. Highlights. Do you want the highlights to not be affected by the vignette? Well, if you slide that all the way over, the highlights kind of come back in. And you can only see that in the sky up there, right, for this picture. Okay, like I said, it's too much vignette for me. I like to do it subtly so that the viewer doesn't really know that it's present, right? Even if they're a trained photographer, they may not know that it's there, right? And yet, if I remove it, oh, well, you know, it seems like something's missing now if it's gone. So it, like I said, it keeps the attention of the viewer in the middle of the frame. It can be used for dramatic effects, to make a picture go low key and so on. It's just a matter of choice. Okay. The other thing I wanted to cover is adding a border to a picture and other ways to do vignette. So those things are not in the raw converter, they're in Photoshop. Okay, so I'm just going to cancel this for now because I have already opened the image in Photoshop. And here we are. Okay, so here's my image. Right. Okay, so I can, by the way, create a vignette in here. And I would do that with the elliptical or rectangular marquee tool. I would feather that tool, and how much you feather is dependent on the resolution of the image you're working on, how many pixels per inch. If it's a full image, fully large coming out of your camera, you know, and it's 50 megabytes or something like that, or even 25 megabytes or whatever, you know, you need to feather more. Okay. This image was exported for screen resolution. It's 72 pixels per inch and it's 1080 pixels on the long side. So it doesn't need that much. It might need, say, 60 pixels of feathering. And then I just go in here and I draw a box. Right? And because I've feathered the box, we'll get some round corners as my computer speeds up. Come on, computer, catch up to me. Yeah. There we go. It could be rounder, right? It turns out I could use more feathering here, right? Because the corners are not very round, right? So all I would do is like do Command D, which gets rid of that selection, and I'll bump up the feathering. I'll try now 90 pixels. Okay, let's see how that goes. So I'll draw my box again. Right. Takes a second. The computer's lagging because it's a little bit overwhelmed with everything. Right. Then we get more rounded. You know, I would even go further, but let's let it go at that. Okay, so now what's happening is I've selected the middle of the picture, but I want to select the perimeter of the picture. How do I do that? Well, I take select and I inverse it, which is Command Shift I, or Control Shift I if you're on a PC. Right? Invert it, and now see marching ants out at the edge of the picture and also that box that I made inside. So now the outer edge, right, is selected. I can darken the outer edge by taking an adjustment layer. Right, here's an adjustment layer, and I can go and make the edge darker by doing this. Ooh. Right. Let's say I don't like that. I'll close that and I'll go Command Z. Right? And I'm going to use my history to hopefully bring back that selection. Okay, I get that. invert the selection. Here's another thing you can do when you're in Photoshop that you can't do in the raw converter. So I can add vignette, but I can do it with color. Well, actually, I don't know if it'll work with this black and white image. Maybe not. So if I were in a color image, I could say, all right, here in my layer panel, in layers, I'm going to go down here and say solid color, right? And then I can add like maybe a blue or something like that, a very dark blue. You know? And I could say OK, and then let's see what happens if I change this blend mode from normal to, let's try it, see what happens with darken, with overlay. Right, so now when I apply this vignette, I can change its blend mode, right, and get different effects. And I may not like these effects right out of the box. Let's say I go with soft light, right, but then I take the opacity down, so again, it's only subtly there. So in some ways, I have a lot more control over adding vignette with a color fill like I just did, right? As opposed to in Camera Raw where you're just making the edges darker, right? Again, I don't know if it works here. I'm kind of going quickly and I would spend more time maybe choosing another color, something, you know, a different blend mode here. So I can turn that off if I like it, off and on. I can get rid of it by trashing it if I don't like it, or just leave it there as an option. Okay, so that's another way to make a vignette. And by the way, I could have used the elliptical marquee instead of the rectangular marquee. Okay. So experiment with vignetting, both in Camera Raw, but also in Photoshop, and see what you can come up with. Okay, another thing that you can do is add a border. Like, why would you want to add a border? Well, it's a framing device, for one thing. You know, it kind of contains the picture. Another reason that people like to add borders is that it has historical references. Like if I show you this image by Diane Arbus, it's actually a photograph of Diane Arbus, or Deanne Arbus. And you see that black edge around the picture. Right? This was actually shot by John Gossage, but Diane Arbus herself used black borders quite a bit. And this is back in analog days. Right? And what that black border indicates is that the image was not cropped. It's a full frame image. It was composed when the picture was shot. Right? And what's creating that black border is the extra space around the negative that is exposing the paper. If you haven't done analog photography, you know, you're working with negatives, you're working with negative holders, these pieces of metal that hold the negative flat, and usually they come out of the factory with a hole in them that's the size of a 35mm frame or a medium format frame, and they crop the image a little bit so that you don't have that black around there. But it's common, and I used to do this back in the day, is use a file and open up that little window and make it bigger and allow some of the unexposed negative to show through, and it consequently makes this black edge. It does act as a framing device, but it also implies that there was no cropping that happened here. You're seeing the complete picture. Okay? So doing this with your images acts in all those same ways. It acts like, oh, I'm adding a border, or it also can say, hey, I did not do any cropping, which is kind of cheating in this case. It actually did crop. Okay, two ways to add a border here. Okay, here I'm in my layer panel, right? And that's a panel over on the right that is indicated by these two. They look like, you know, layers. They look like sheets of paper stacked up or something like that. So I'm in that layer panel, so I see the image here. And if I double click on that layer, I get into what are called layer styles. Right, open up. There we go. Here are layer styles. Right? There's a whole bunch of different layer styles, from outer glow, inner glow, drop shadow, and so on. But what I'm going to do for this is add a stroke. Okay, stroke is here about 1/3 of the way down. Now if I just click on the little box next to stroke, it will, if I have it set up, it added a little bit of a stroke there. Take a look at the edge of the picture. I'll turn this off, it goes away. Turn it back on, it appears. It's not very large, right? So it might be a little bit hard to see. As I click on that checkbox, you can see the panel to the right. The properties for the stroke do not appear. Okay? For any of these effects, if you want to see the properties for the effect, you need to highlight that panel like this. Okay? All right, so now I can say, well, that black border is hardly visible. I don't like it. I'm going to make it bigger. Right? So I'm taking the size and sliding it over. Right? It's going to be gargantuan now. It's very large. Right? Not only is it large, it's very crisp. Right? It's very geometric. Right? It does not look like somebody back in the days, in analog days, filed an opening in the negative holder. It looks like it's a graphic. It can be nice. It can be the way to go. And if it's small, to be honest with you, if I take it back down to kind of where it was, I think I had it at 8 pixels or something like that. I might make it a little bit bigger, clicking in the box, going up to 10 pixels. Right? It's more present. Right? So it's a subjective decision how big that border is, and frankly, if you want a border at all. I can say, what do I want to do with that? Do I want to change the color of it? If I click on that box, I can change it just like I could create a blue, like I just tried to do, or I didn't try, I did, with the previous picture. Right? So now I have a blue border. Right? I'm not saying do this. I probably would not do that. Right? I wouldn't want a color out on the edge, but that's me. Right? You might. And in fact, it's a way of using this technique to say, yeah, it's a black border, kind of like a full frame image, but it's new. It's more, maybe it's more contemporary. So you can change the color of it, suffice to say. Right? You can also change its presence. Even if you don't like it, I'll bump it up again so we can see it big. Okay, there's my blue border, but maybe I don't like it. I can change the blend mode, just like I did with my other effect. And in this case, it's not really affecting it too much. It's not blending. It's not changing the interaction between the layers here too much. Okay, I'm going to go take that back to normal. Okay. Up above that, it says position. Inside, outside, which it doesn't exist if it's on the outside, right? Or split, center, right? Now it's half inside, half outside, which basically cuts the width of that border in half. Right? I'm going to put it on the inside again. Okay? Why would you want to have it on the outside or split? Because if I expand the canvas, then you get to see that. You'll get to see the whole border if it's either on the outside or split. Okay. All right, so that's another way to add vignette. Okay, or I'm sorry, not vignette, but to add a border around the picture. Okay. I'm going to cancel this. I'll turn that off. I'll cancel it. I'll just say OK now. Okay. So now I'm back to no border. Okay. All right, here's my last go at showing you another way to put a border around a picture, one that might look a little bit more naturalistic. I'm going to expand the canvas. Okay, in Photoshop, the image background here, click on the lock and unlock the image. And then when I expand the canvas, you'll get what you'll see in just a second. So I'm going to go to, is it under Image? Right under Image, I have Canvas Size. Okay, the keystroke is Command Option C. C stands for Canvas. okay? Or Control Alt C if you're on a PC. So I go like this, canvas size, right? And it tells me my canvas is 17.4 inches square. Okay, I'm going to expand it. Down below, we have this box that tells us where the image is anchored. In the middle, to the left, to the top, to the right, right? Okay, in this case, I want to expand the canvas equally around all four sides, right? There are times where I make diptychs, 2 images next to each other, triptychs, 3 images next to each other, where I want to expand the canvas and shift the existing elements to the left or to the right, that kind of thing. I'm leaving it in the center. Okay, I'm going to increase the width. I'll go up to, let's say, 17.7, both width and height. I say OK. It expands the canvas, and I have this little extra space. Right? Now, if I export this image as a JPEG, this extra space will look white, right, until I add a border on top of it. If I export this image now as a PNG, which I see more and more on the web, not exactly sure why, but it's usually used for graphics like logos. I'm seeing photographs saved as PNGs. JPEG format is the convention for photographs. Right? If I do export it as a PNG, that becomes transparency around the edge. Wherever you see checkerboard, that becomes transparent. Okay? There are good reasons to use that in certain occasions. Okay, I'm going to add a border, but I'm going to make it look a little bit more naturalistic, a little bit more organic. Right? So instead of like that geometric thing that we got when we added a stroke, I'm going to take a brush.